So welcome to the Ceres Investor Water Toolkit webinar. Thank you for joining us and thank you for your interest. My name is Monica Freeman, and I'll be joined by Robert Fernandez of Breckenridge Capital Advisors and Siobhan Collins of Ceres. Before turning things over to Robert Fernandez for an introduction, I just wanted to give a few logistical tips. One, we are going to be muting all lines as folks jump on board. If you do have a question, please look to the bottom left of the webinar screen, and you should be able to either type in a question directly there or click on your name under the participant list, and you can also raise a hand for a question. We will also be having a Q&A at the bottom of the hour, the end of the hour as well. Also, if you want to unmute your line, you can press *7 during the Q&A at the end as well. We will also be recording the webinar, so for any of your colleagues who are unable to join, that will be sent to folks as well. And as a reminder, we do recommend that you dial in using the phone line versus your computers. For whatever reason, the conferencing service seems to work a bit better that way. So without further ado, again, I'm super excited super excited to be sharing the Investor Water Toolkit with you, a resource for investors on water, and would like to turn it over to Robert Fernandez of Capital Advisors to further welcome everyone. Robert?
Hi, thank you, Monica. Yes, my name is Rob Fernandez. I am Director of Environmental, Social, and Governance Research at Breckenridge Capital Advisors. And just for a little on Breckenridge, we are a high-grade fixed income manager based in Boston. We offer several investment strategies for institutional as well as individual clients, including those focused on sustainability and sustainable bond portfolios. Almost 8 years ago, we integrated ESG analysis into our research process. At the time, we believed and have since found that ESG risks can have a negative impact on the credit or investment quality of the companies and municipalities we invest in. And more specific to our conversation today, water is certainly an important and growing environmental challenge for many industries and regions, and therefore a growing risk for investors. Changing rainfall patterns can lead to supply chain shortages for textile and beverage makers, causing costs to rise and profits to fall. And many coastal communities in the U.S. are starting to experience infrastructure vulnerabilities due to climate risks, which could lead to higher capital spending, an increased debt load, and a weaker investment profile. So those are just a couple examples. So understanding water and other ESG issues and how they are being managed is certainly a key investment consideration for us. So I'm delighted to participate, and Breckenridge, a number of analysts have, but we're delighted to participate as an ongoing working member of the Investor Water Hub. The Water Hub offers an effective venue to share ideas and best practices about how to analyze water issues and how they can be incorporated into an investment process really across all asset classes. So we certainly value the opportunity to work collaboratively with other investors on ESG issues because they can be quite challenging, as I'm sure you're all aware, and are certainly evolving and can in many cases be solved better collectively, and that's certainly what we have found. And we also really enjoyed taking part in the review process for this toolkit over the past 18 months. A number of our analysts were involved and provided input on the toolkit, including for the Muni Bond Water Risk Cheat Sheet. The toolkit delivers an incredibly and comprehensive source of information on how to access and assess water risks in investment portfolios, and it can be accessed through an interactive web-based format. So it's really a nice tool. So we're excited to use the toolkit going forward and look forward to continuing our collaboration with other investors and Ceres through the Investor Water Hub. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn the conversation over to Monica and Siobhan with Ceres to provide an overview of the toolkit. Monica and
Thank you,
Siobhan.
Robert. Thank you, Robert. So thank you for that introduction and really speaking to why investors have been involved with Ceres Investor Water Hub and developing the toolkit. And the toolkit really could not have been developed without their contribution. So very grateful. And just a quick introduction to ourselves. So my name is Monica Freeman. I'm the Director of Investor Water Initiatives here at Ceres, and my colleague Siobhan Collins. And we both have a background in water, but also deep expertise and experience in the financial fields. Siobhan very much working with investors on shareholder resolutions and engagement strategies. Myself as a chartered financial analyst and experience on the buy side, really interested in assisting investors with their daily investment and portfolio decision-making processes and how ESG and water issues can be more seamlessly integrated. So, please, if anyone's listening or new to Ceres, feel free to reach out at any point with more questions or need for resources. But as Rob mentioned, the Investor Water Toolkit really was just an incredible effort by so many investors. We had over 40 institutional investors listed here in 8 different working groups. We estimated, over 600 hours of work collectively plus to come up with the ideas that are now on the webpage, the Investor Water Toolkit. And these investors, really dove into small mini working groups to provide and research different areas in the toolkit and provide kind of best practices and key recommendations. But in addition to the investors, we were very grateful for so many others that also contributed, nonprofits, for-profits, academics, a number of other institutions, including our foundation support partners who supported the work. We're just really grateful for so many that have already been doing so much good work in this field around corporate and social responsible investing and integrating water. And the toolkit really builds on that work and looks to highlight all that really good existing work as well. So what is the Investor Water Toolkit more specifically? It really is a how-to guide on ESG and water integration, really providing guidance along every step of investor decision-making. It starts with, how do you establish internal institutional priorities, or as a board of trustees for an investment firm or endowment or foundation, how do you establish priorities related to water? Then also, how do you modify or improve your buy-sell analysis, your portfolio and asset class analysis, portfolio attribution, looking across asset class risks, and also a lot of recommendations on improving engagement practices with the companies that are in investor portfolios. So it really does focus on methods. It doesn't intend to be prescriptive. We really respect that every institution has its own priorities, and so there's many ideas there in the toolkit, but it really is up to the investor to choose which recommendations or ideas to make their own. At times it is aspirational. We do have some ideas and recommendations that are very challenging, but we really feel represent where water integration and ESG integration are going. So it is sort of trying to build a pathway to the future. I think one of the most exciting elements of the toolkit as well are the case studies that are embedded related to different topic areas. And so a number of investors and others have provided case studies on what water integration looks like in real life. And I think those are extremely helpful to guide others on water integration. And as I mentioned before, there's also, we really do build on much of the good work of others. So we highlight, other tools that already exist, other data sets and resources, be they from nonprofit organizations or academic institutions or government websites, where else you can go to get good information and improve your research processes. So what we're going to do this morning or this afternoon if you're in Europe is we are going to give you a high-level overview of some of the key elements that are accessible in the toolkit. We are going to follow up this webinar with a further series of deeper dives. So, we are going to be covering at very high level a lot of ideas. Be patient, and if you have more information or want more information, other than of course going into the website, we will be doing more webinars on different topic areas within the toolkit. So please join us for those as well. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Siobhan Collins, who led the working group and the content development around really establishing priorities as an institutional investor related to water. So Siobhan, if I can turn it to you.
Yeah, certainly, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So maybe this is, as we're in the start of the new year, it only seems relevant as part of the toolkit, new year, new goals. That's oftentimes where we find ourselves individually, but similar for companies who set their own priorities, but also for institutional investors, it's really important to look at what's important for you as a firm. So as part of this chapter, one of the foundational elements of the toolkit beyond understanding water risks, which is our first module that I would encourage everyone to look at, is weaving ESG risks and their opportunities into formal investment policies and governance language. So the Hub working group that I worked with and had the opportunity to engage over the past few months, there was a lot of discussion on how investment beliefs and policies can, one, align institutional goals with investment practices, but also how they're really critical for establishing institutional priorities. And, I'm going to walk through some elements of this 5-step process, but I would say the target audience for this first chapter is really focused on certain people, but it could be diverse. So while investment beliefs and policies primarily are used by asset owners to inform ESG priorities, really a growing number of asset managers state that having their own clear set of beliefs and policies that integrate core ESG criteria can really help them build deeper relationships with both their clients and drive new product development. So I'll talk on that a little bit later, but do understand that this is for a broad spectrum of institutional investors, and everyone should be thinking about what their priorities are on ESG when it comes to, in this case, water. This governance language can absolutely inform the investment decision-making process and also for companies on the line, drive corporate engagement priorities. And we'll hit on that a little bit during the shareholder engagement section at the end of the presentation. So overall, I just want to say that this chapter has a lot of content in it. You can see here that there's 5 key steps, and there's a bunch of case studies that are associated with all of them. So as we're talking through different elements, I wanted to kick to the next slide and just kind of share with you that all of us and similarly investors are on a journey, and they're on a journey when it comes to water, and Monica outlines that a little bit about the toolkit. It's a one-stop shop for you all, but you can take certain elements and run with it. So I would say that when firms are thinking about setting their water priorities and building those into their governance language, into their formal investment beliefs and policy statements, that there's a spectrum out there. And a firm's water priorities and goals will definitely be unique and reflect the organization's own values, their objectives for shareholder value creation, and their style of their own investing. So to draw on this example right here, you'll see that there's definitely a spectrum of where your policies can land and the specific language. So to call on a few examples, let's say you're a mainstream asset owner, you might actually initially choose to focus on helping to improve the disclosure of water risk among your portfolio companies. And so if you're thinking about action items that would be related to that, this might result in working and pushing for more disclosure when it comes to corporate sustainability reports, looking at water integrated into 10K filings, or taking an approach at a larger systems level and engaging with stock exchanges and financial regulators on water risk disclosure. And as you kind of fall along this spectrum, you might take a different approach. So for another example, let's say a faith-based investment firm, they might be setting internal mandates to focus on ensuring that their investment holdings align with international norms, such as the human right to water and sanitation. So it's really important to know that this journey differs for many different investors, but there's a lot of key elements and resources within the toolkits that can help you in developing and finessing this language and what your goals might be. And so on that point, just some resources for you. I was a quick story here. Earlier this week, I had a chance to connect with one of our Ceres Investor Network members, quite a large pension fund here in the U.S. And they're actually going through, if I jump back, step 1 and step 2 right now of establishing the leadership commitment within their own teams and their board of trustees, but also really researching and establishing their ESG priorities. And they're coming to us and other experts in the field to help them determine what layers of ESG, and I'm proud to say water, that they're going to be building into their revised investment policy statements this year. So beyond some of the tools, I would say what I really wanted to call out is there's a toolkit compendium of investment policies and beliefs that peers have that we've collected from peers. So there's a couple dozen examples that you can dig into if you're in this process yourself or your teams in the coming year, and you can just reflect on what North American and global investors have been including in their own language. And jumping to this next slide of why this is important. So you're setting your priorities as a firm. I just wanted to take a step back and look at the larger landscape right now. There's a lot of conversations happening when it comes to climate and carbon at the international level, but likewise there's a lot of progress and momentum when it comes to water at a global level as well. And you'll see here on this slide that we're seeing a bunch of integration with investors when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular SDG 6. In addition to the human right to water and sanitation. So there is a global push and mandate at a higher level to also look at water that investors, companies, and others should also be paying attention to. And kind of lastly, as Monica said, what's really great about the toolkit, and I would just say that we've heard this from investors who've started to explore the online tool, and you'll see a link in the chat function, is that we've really tried to pull from our back pocket a lot of different case studies. So just here on the slide, I've outlined a couple different case studies that talk about establishing priorities and beliefs, and I would encourage all of you to dig into these a little bit more and reach out to us with any questions. So Monica, I might turn things over to you to now jump into the portfolio and asset class analysis, and I do encourage folks to use the chat function to ask any questions.
And let us know too, there's a few folks that are mentioning they're having trouble hearing. So if you are, please do type that into the chat Q&A and let us know, and we'll adjust. But just turning it to the next section, so another, once you do really set firm-wide priorities, belief statements, policies, and really establish what is a priority as an institution that that is so foundational. A next step really would be to do and look at portfolio and asset class water issues and risks. And the benefits of looking at a portfolio approach is, some ESG and water risks really truly are only visible in aggregate. And in addition, it really also helps prioritize security level water risk research. So we have a number of recommendations in the toolkit related to water footprinting, risk heat mapping, and we have a bit of a deep dive into water risks in passive portfolios and investment indices, and include sort of how the different leverage points as well related to portfolio water risk analysis. And also there is a number of recommendations which we won't have time to get into for this webinar, but around how to really look at different asset classes and where risks lie, and how to compare and sort of contrast, where to start really diving more deeply in different asset classes. So as part of the research related to really how to do better portfolio analysis, what Ceres did is we actually did a bit of research related to 4 of the mainstream investment indices. So we looked at the S&P 500, the Russell 3000, MSCI World, MSCI Emerging Markets, and using some of the SASB materiality data, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, they have done and gone through a research process of really highlighting which sectors and industries have either medium or high water risks, and this could include wastewater, water management, water sourcing, and so on, and supply chains as well. And really what we did then is we interpreted some of that data and created a classification system of medium, high, low, and then applied that to the different indices. And we were surprised to discover just how high exposure is. So, thinking that water risk is just a small portion of portfolios and mainstream indices, it actually is rather large. So as you can see in the visual here, the yellow highlights industries that are medium water risk, and the red high. And you can see that the majority of all of these indices either have holdings in medium and high. So really water is a significant material issue that really should be paid attention to by all investors, including those that are holding passive or creating passive products. And often the patterns are, we really looked at the different indices, and that we have a case study in the toolkit for those that want more information on this research. But the sectors and the industries that come out as often being of high risk and significant weight are oil and gas, consumable fuels, chemicals, semiconductors, beverages, food products. In some indices, such as S&P 500, electric utilities. Emerging markets also includes metals and mining. So those are some of the indices that are really flagged as a priority. What some of the pension funds and institutional investors are starting to do, and we were excited to get a case study from the Pension Fund of Florida, SBA Florida. And for the toolkit, they contributed and did analysis related to one of their large passive portfolios, a $15 billion passive portfolio, where they actually looked at water risks across the entire portfolio, both at the industry level and also down to the individual security level. This is a snapshot of the industry level analysis, and the green highlights the squares, the size of the individual company holdings, and the different shades. Green is lower risk companies as assessed by MSCI, and the analysis was done using a FactSet, which is a financial data provider. And what this really allowed them to see where they have high water risk holdings, and really allowed them to prioritize further research. So just as an example, consumer discretionary, they have a lot of smaller holdings in aggregate that actually have high water risk, ditto with consumer staples and so on. And so they could go through this tool and this process, do deeper dives into those individual industries, and it really helped them speed up and prioritize their research on water risk. In addition, one reason to really look at portfolio-wide holdings is, unlike corporate water risk analysis where the corporation, is being studied at the individual as an individual entity, investors have the additional challenge of holding, one portfolio manager may have, 40, 60, 80 companies that they have to do research on and really understand. And they may find, even though they have, let's say, high performing companies on water or are fairly responsible companies on water, when you look in aggregate, they may find that they actually have a lot of industries that tend to have high water risks or have industry-specific water issues, or they may find, especially if they do sort of geographic analysis, that some of their holdings in aggregate, they have a lot of exposure to a particular geography that is water challenged. So portfolio analysis, can lead to good insights, even if an investor thinks they have pretty high performing companies on water. Another reason is really that it helps prioritize. So instead of doing a deep dive on water risk analysis for 40, 80, and in some cases, some pension funds hold thousands of companies, you really do need a prioritization process. So, doing the heat mapping, seeing which industries or companies you may hold that are, significant holdings and also high water risk as a first step. Also understanding, where you have influence and where you have leverage to mitigate risks is a helpful analysis. And then once you narrow down your universe of holdings and see that you have, let's say, a couple dozen companies that you really are concerned about, you can then really prioritize those for deeper research or engagement, and it really helps you in that process and to be more efficient. And so, as you start to do more individual security analysis, the toolkit does have a chapter on understand water risks, and these are just ideas that we really think are foundational or fundamental to really understand the unique nature of water risks. And, some highlights through that section is, one, water risks are often revenue related and can be very immediate. So often we think that water, or there's the thought that water risks are very much related to direct operations and supply chain and as a cost. But often we find, as we study water risks, that it is really related to a firm or institution's ability to operate or generate revenue and to grow into the future. And these risks are often related to social license to operate risks. So more and more, as Rob mentioned, there's more climate and precipitation variability, and including flooding, longer droughts, deeper droughts, higher population pressures. There is more competition for water in different areas, and communities, regions are really starting to challenge companies, in different regions if they are setting up operations or want to grow operations related to their water use or their wastewater management. And so we are finding more incidents of that, and if that social license to operate is taken away in a region, operations cease, revenue ceases, the ability to really expand in those markets or source in those markets ceases as well. And we're seeing that as a really growing material water risk issue. And often, water risks are also related to wastewater management and water quality. So, be it related to food production and the use of fertilizers, to the management of tailings ponds and wastewater accidents. An investor really needs to look beyond, are we exposed to drought or supply issues? Those are very important, but also it's important to look at the wastewater and the water quality issues as well. I'm going to skip to the next slide. The water risk dashboard that you see in this slide is, very much a framing that a number of investors have found very useful. And this was originally developed by Pete Klopp of PGGM, and we've sort of framed it a little further for this tool. But it really is looking, and we really find, and many investors really find a useful approach is to really look at water dependency. So how dependent is a company on water? What are its needs? The security, the water resource security, in those regions. What are the physical, regulatory, social risks, including social license? What are the region-specific water security issues? And those two factors really speak to how vulnerable a company is to water risks. And then on the third slice of the pie is really looking at corporate response. So how resilient or responsive is a company to those risks? So they may be operating and be very water needy as a company, but they may be very responsive and resilient and really have good comprehensive water stewardship plans. So we, for engagement, we often frame the water risk dashboard. You can turn it into sort of a conversation around, so to really assess, a company's vulnerability, you can ask, what do you do? Where do water risks lie in your value chain, from the supply chain to the end of product life cycle? So if you really understand those elements, it helps an investor really understand the water dependency. And where do you do it? What are the regions of concern for the company, and what water risks are most relevant or material in that region? Are they regulatory? Is it physical? Is it social license? And then resilience, what are you doing about it? So what are the company's responses to these risks, and how much might the company lose due to water risk? So having those conversations with management. So in buy-sell analysis, and as we mentioned with the dashboard, it really is important to take an industry-specific, industry-specific view on water risk analysis. And I'm just pausing to see if I know we're getting a few questions come through. Let's see. We're going to we're speeding through, and we'll be answering questions shortly, and my colleague will try to answer any technical questions as well in the chat box. So thank you for your questions, and we will be getting to those. So just as part of buy-sell analysis, it really is important to understand where water risks lie in industry value chains. And so we do try to provide some deep dives into specific industries, or we do also have some data and a database along with this cheat sheet related to where water risks lie in specific industries. So what this screen is showing you here is Ceres worked with SASB to really look at where which industries had high or medium water risks, or what we thought were fairly material water risks. And we looked at the data and studied it as a group with a number of investors, and we added on some additional elements where we thought there were risks that we thought needed highlighting, so we would add those. So those are sort of hard to tell in this visual, but on the website itself, you can see sort of the series editions. Ceres also interpreted some of the SASB data to do sort of a medium and high classification, but certainly there's a lot more information industry by industry in the database. So end users are welcome to click through, but we were really grateful for SASB working with us to really help us highlight, in their process so far, where they're seeing water come up as being material. And as probably many of you know, SASB indicators are now out for public comment and are preliminary. So for folks, this really is sort of a starting process, and that there does need to be, further work industry by industry, but it is a good start. And for those that are really interested in disclosure, we welcome you to go on the SASB website and give additional comments and help them through their process of improving their standards and their disclosure. So in any case, so what this is showing in this visual for investors is, you can look at a specific industry and then see where in the value chain, there are water risks. So for example, in beverage and food products, the top two rows, there are considerable water quantity and quality risks in those industries, in the supply chains. There are also medium or high water risks in direct operations as well, and so on. So it really provides guidance, and so it really is important to not paint a broad brush for all companies. You really do need to take an industry-specific approach to understanding water risks. And I would highlight, we have a section and another and a lot of research at Ceres called Feeding Ourselves Thirsty that really does highlight water risks in food and agriculture supply chains and those companies. So welcome you to take a deeper dive to those issues which are very important for investors. We also wanted to highlight geography does matter. So I would say it's a challenge, but it's also really a benefit of doing water risk analysis. I think, to understand sustainability issues, governance issues, is to understand where a company operates. So I think there's no getting around investors needing to do more geographic type analysis, as they go down the ESG integration journey. And I think water is really emblematic of the importance of really needing to understand place-based issues. And so, water risks in central Mexico are going to be quite different from water risks in, southwest United States and so on and so forth, or southern India. And it's important to understand, where you have, which companies are high water risk in their industries, but also, where they are operating or have supply chains if you can. And I know it's a challenge to get data, but more and more different NGOs and map and tool makers, are starting to provide that ability to do that analysis. And these are just two examples, and there are others, but on the left-hand side of this visual, we have the CDP has an analytics platform, CDP Water, and it allows you to look at a portfolio of companies as is the case for the visual here, and it shows which river basin is mentioned by different companies in that portfolio. So it can highlight, for example, I'm not sure if you can see it well because of the size of the print, but on the graph on the left, it'll show that the Mississippi Basin is mentioned most often, by this particular portfolio. So really understanding, which water basins are discussed by companies investors own, that can be a one way forward in really engaging companies on what is happening in that basin and what are the issues and so on, and the risks to that water resource. In addition, this is also just a highlight of, this is on Bloomberg's BMAP function, where you can now overlay company locations on top of the WRI's Water Risk Atlas. So again, it's just a way to flag, where to have deeper discussions or do deeper research on place-based water issues. So I believe this is Dow Chemicals, the yellow dots showcasing, where Dow has different operations. But again, more analysis and better disclosure by companies on regional specific issues and the size of exposure to these risks is really important, and we'd like to see that evolving in the future. The toolkit also has many resources that investors can use. So we have a characterization of a lot of the different really good tools, data sets, and resources that are out there. Again, for-profit, non-profit, this is just a snapshot of one table that kind of characterizes some of the different water tools that are out there and what they're good at. And so depending on the investor's need, they can pick and choose the resources they want. We also have, in the text itself, there are a number of investors that are doing a lot of very sophisticated place-based analysis using government data sets and private data sets, related to everything from precipitation variability, water quality, to social conflicts as well. So we have a number of ideas in the toolkit for different research resources also. And I think an important idea that did come through the development of the toolkit and the different working groups is that we also very much had a number of folks really seeing and including ourselves that the future of water risk analysis is really related to doing better scenario or stress testing analysis. So capturing metrics on water really act as very good flags that there may be risk, but often it doesn't get to that fundamental business case materiality question of, how much financial exposure do I have to this company related to water risk? How important our water risk analysis, and is the company doing the right thing in their water mitigation strategies? So really asking those kind of tougher questions is going to really take doing more, having deeper engagement questions and doing more stress testing analysis and scenario analysis. And so we're a number of investors, including Norges Bank Investment Management out of Oslo, has started to really do some really good research and studies in this area, and many others. And what this example here is highlighting, an example of how to do some stress testing analysis in the mining sector. And this was taken from Dr. Manu Lal, working with Norges Bank. They're undertaking a study, a 3-year study, academic study of water risks in the mining sector. And this highlights, one way forward in terms of you need to map pathways. So understand what a water risk issue is, understand the probability of the issue. So for example, in mining, there may be in one region a lot of cumulative effects from many decades of toxic discharge or poor regulation. And then, so one pathway may be there's a really high probability that your existing, as a company, your existing infrastructure cannot handle its wastewater, due to climate issues or let's say growth in operations. So there, you will need to spend additional capital. It's not too costly for this particular company, but it is going to increase, the daily cost of operation. So you're going to have lower operating profits. That's the top pathway. From that cumulative effects toxic discharge issue, there may be also the risk that there could be social conflicts in this region. And although it might be low probability, that would have a very high financial impact. And so it would be really important for the company and investor to really understand also the lower revenues or blocks to future growth due to these social issues related to decades of toxic discharge in this region. So doing that type of analysis, many investors think is definitely the way forward in understanding a deeper understanding of buy-sell analysis and individual security risks. So in the toolkit itself, also beyond many of the ideas we discussed there are really relevant to either public equity holdings or corporate bonds. We have a number of recommendations also related to private equity. We have a private equity due diligence decision tree related to water, and also, as Rob mentioned, a municipal bond water risk cheat sheet, which really guides investors either in the muni bond space or that are really interested in cities and municipalities on how to really research and engage municipalities on water risk issues. And we will be having follow-on webinars going into, there's some really great ideas from these two working groups, and we're really excited to be sharing those in the weeks ahead as follow-on webinars. I'm now going to turn it back to my colleague Siobhan, who's going to give a few moments highlights of some of also the engagement resources that are in the toolkit as well. So Siobhan?
Yeah, thanks, Monica. And I would say for those who have questions coming in, just we'll get to those at the top of the hour as we get closer to wrapping things up, but just encourage you to send us some thoughts over the chat function. But as you've probably heard over the past hour, there's been sprinkles of how it's important to engage as an investor, whether it's at a systems level or with your portfolio companies. So just wanted to hit on that there is a robust chapter of the toolkit that outlines all different types of engagement resources if you're starting to think about how you might want to make a difference and jump in this element of your work. But as seen in the last slide for both private equity and fixed income, whether investors are either pursuing an active or passive strategy for their portfolios, it's encouraged that all investors should consider engaging companies and developing guidelines and engagement policies concerning ESG issues. And certain elements of the engagement chapter really do set out key water engagement questions, and I'll bounce back really quickly, but part of those first questions that investors should be asking really align with this water risk dashboard and asking a company or an entity, what do you do, where do you do it, and what are you doing about it? Beyond that, we have all different questions that dig into more detail that we encourage you to look over in addition to sector-related resources. Perhaps what we're most excited to share with folks is that if you've been following Ceres, you might recall that 2 years ago we did put out a handbook for investor water risk integration. In that handbook there was about a 10-year data set of trends of shareholder resolutions related to water. We've refreshed that with the past few years of shareholder resolution trends on all things freshwater, and we're going to be releasing that come February. And let's say you're thinking about engaging a mining company on a risk or a food and beverage company. There are a lot of great examples of asks and key concerns that other shareholders have been putting on the table for over the past decade. So do stay tuned for that new resource that is forthcoming. But also as part of this chapter, you'll see multiple different guides and a whole element on how it's important to also drive systems level change. So when you think about all the resources that are coming in, whether it's the toolkit or research in-house within your own teams, you do have quite a lot of influence in your own hands to work with local academics, NGO partners, stock exchanges, disclosure bodies, and helping them build out the pathway for fresh water and better water stewardship. So I encourage certainly everyone to look at the engagement chapter. Just a quick example here on the next slide is that oftentimes when you think about the power of shareholder engagement, whether it be through letters, dialogues, shareholder resolutions, multiple different venues, is that it's very important to benchmark this journey. And it is very much a journey for investors, for companies who are on the line. We're constantly evolving best practices when it comes to sustainability and likewise for water-related issues. So I do believe we have some folks from ICCR, the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility online. But this is an example of their hierarchy of impact that a lot of their investor members will use in the trajectory as they're thinking about shareholder engagement. So this is just one example that it is a journey. It's important to track your progress both internally and make sure it aligns with your goals and policies, but also for the companies or other parties that you're working with. And to that note, there's like every chapter or module of the toolkit, there's a lot of different case studies that you can jump into. Examples from some of the largest pension funds to drought, stress testing tools that have been developed from some of the biggest banks, and that's talking about, that one's a really interesting case study that I would recommend those on the line to explore. In addition to how as investors you can work together in a coordinated fashion, collaborative engagement to hit on sector issues. So there's one about lessons learned from Asia. So in this chapter, it's not only for North American investors, it is kind of a one-stop shop and a really good platform for others to look into. So I think that's where I wanted to wrap things up when it comes to engagement. And knowing that we have about 10 minutes left, definitely with those on the line, especially that are new to Ceres, wanted to turn things over to Monica to talk about how you can engage with us further and ways that we're going to be rolling out and promoting the Investor Water Toolkit in case-by-case areas of chapter elements over the next few months. So Monica, do you want to kind of wrap us up on next steps and ways to get involved?
Thank you, Siobhan. So just if you want to learn more, of course, go on our website, Ceres Investor Water Toolkit, to learn more. We are going to be having some deeper dive webinars, one on private equity water due diligence that will be coming up soon, as well as we were going to be doing a deeper dive after that on engagement practices on water and really exploring the power and tactics of shareholder engagement, including some exciting analysis that we're doing related to shareholder resolution trends related to water as well. So please look for those. If you also want to, if you're an institutional investor and you want to find out more information about joining the Investor Water Hub, which is a working group of series of investors interested in water and really learning and a lot of peer-to-peer sharing on water issues, feel free to reach out to Siobhan or I, via the Ceres website. We also, for any investors that would like to contribute a case study, the Investor Water Toolkit is really a live, evolving resource. So as new ideas, methods, investor practices surface, we really do want to highlight those and share them with the market. So please do reach out if you'd like to contribute a case study. We really welcome those. So in addition, I did want to say, thank you for your attention, and we have a few minutes now to turn it to questions. So please either type your question in the question box below. I know we have a couple, or raise your hand and we'll take your questions that way. So I see there are a couple questions. One from Joanne Ott, thank you. What is the technical difference between water footprinting and heat mapping? Excellent question. We are, I would say at this point, we tend to use it interchangeably, even though it may have some slight differences depending on the end user. I think footprinting, there might be more of an inclination that there is sort of volumetric water data in the footprinting itself, and the risk heat mapping might be more of a scoring method. But Ceres is actually working with a number of investors to explore the water footprinting / risk heat mapping concepts and methods, and we will be coming out with more recommendations on kind of different approaches depending on priorities that the investors have. So as you know, there's a lot of work being done on carbon and climate footprinting, but we're also looking to really explore water as well, and so look for more on that topic. So let's see. Another question is, what is the best way to make asset owners aware of the investment risks and also the opportunities within water? That's a great question as well. I would say, with the the risk of sounding a little self-promotional, there's a great case study in the toolkit by the State Pension Fund of Florida on why they paid attention to water and the benefits of doing so as a big pension fund, and just how that was helpful as sort of one of the as a really kind of deep dive as an ESG issue. So there's a lot of benefits, and that case study highlights a number of them in terms of just really being aware, really understanding environmental, social risks, and governance risks as well. So we hope some of those case studies and the Florida one in the first chapter, Understand Water Risks, is I think a good starting point to answer some of those questions. I'm going to see, is there anybody else on that has raised their hands online as well?
And while we're checking that, another question coming in. Certainly, a lot of our case studies cover examples from investors, whether they were hub members or others within the Ceres Investor Network. Someone's asking here, especially with the case studies, do they have to be an investor to send along a case study idea? And I'll take that. First and foremost, I would say that we're certainly rolling out best practices in ways that market players, including investors, are looking at integrating water risk specifically. But we'll have other blogs and ways to communicate these within the months ahead. So if you are interested in working with us, do just send us a note at the end of this call or within the coming weeks, and we can look at ways of collaborating together.
Great. So any other, I see Reed has also raised his hand for a question. If you'd like, Siobhan, if you can help me unmute Reed somehow.
Yeah, hi Monica. I just reached out to Reed, and I think his mouse might be a little bit trigger happy today, so he actually doesn't have a question.
Okay, great. Super. So there's one last question regarding scenario and stress testing analysis and why some high probability events might be paired with low financial risk, and vice versa, why some low probability events might be high impact. It really depends on the specific risk pathway. So, a low probability event such as being, let's say, pushed out of a community, that may genuinely be a very low probability event, but it might have a very high financial impact. So it really depends on the issue. Of course, a low probability event may also have a low financial impact. Also, even I would say it is an absolute. So you would really combine the probability with the impact, and then it may as a final result be a medium or high risk. So so those are the specifics there. But happy to just discuss that with you after the call as well, and give you more details of that specific example. Anyone else that has questions? Okay, so thank you everyone for your interest in the Investor Water Toolkit. Again, thank you to many of you who have participated the over year and a half of really developing and working on this, and the many ideas. We're really thankful to many contributors and investors and others. And we look forward to sharing some deeper dives. We went through a lot of ideas and different elements, and we hope you stay with us for some of the webinars that will go into specific topic areas which we think hold a lot of value to investors and others in understanding water issues. So thank you again, and please do keep in touch and feel free to engage with Ceres on this issue or others as interest arises. So thanks again.